What's going on, beautiful people? This is the Perspective Chasers podcast, and I am your host, John. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the expectations you set for yourself, others, and life. I'm going to start this episode, as always, with an update of how the podcast is going and try to see what new information I can kind of share with you in that sense, and also how the kind of behind the scenes process is going for myself. And then we'll get into the main topic of today. So in terms of editing, the last episode I done was the first guest episode. I'm halfway through editing that footage at the minute, and although there seems to be the same problems that I have when I'm doing solo footage in terms of pauses or thinking sounds, but I want to leave them in. I was debating heavily whether or not to upgrade the editing software in order to be able to take out the pauses and the repeat words. But at the same time, while I've been talking to people about it, we all seem to think that would also make it a bit robotic if I can push through the pauses and the thinking sounds, because that's something natural. That's always going to come if I'm really trying to deep what I'm about to say, or I'm having a conversation with somebody. Those pauses are going to be natural, and I don't want to take all of those out, because then it's going to make my content seem a bit more robotic. That's how I feel at the minute anyway. I might be proven wrong down the line, but for now I'm going to leave those pauses in. I know it can be frustrating at some points, or if I'm saying the same word over and over again, it will be annoying, and I'm going to do my best to keep that to a minimum. If there is anything severe, I will edit that out, but for the most part I'm going to try keep this trend going of fairly raw footage, because I don't want to build up that wall between myself and the people that I'm trying to talk to. In terms of other editing problems, with two people talking, there's a little bit more movement and a little bit more. So me and Dave are very, very active in our mannerisms. So that kind of movement and all of that, it does tend to create a little bit of microphone interference, which, again, it only lasts a split second. So my whole mentality with the pauses and the stutters, edits, although they happen, they're very brief and it moves on. So in the time it takes to take them out, it would then create stop and starts in the footage, which would make it feel very staggered together. Whereas this is very much more natural, off the top of my head, or a natural conversation with somebody that we follow as much of an intent as we can, but it's going to have its natural tangents and its natural kind of stories that come off of it. So it's going to be a learning curve in that sense of how to kind of best direct those, and how to, in the editing process, kind of take out interference if I can, without making the footage too changey. So I'm not sure if, because we recorded with separate mics, I might be able to go into the editing and reduce the interference at those times, or reduce the volume of one mic at a time. I'm yet to have enough time to sit down and edit that, but I wanted to get another episode recorded because of how my time works with me having a young daughter. It's easier for me to record while I've got this opportunity now, and then edit around childcare. That way I can still keep up a decent pace in kind of getting content out without putting a lot of stress on myself. So doing episode 3, that really come down to the wiring recording of missing my deadline for uploading on Sunday. So I wanted to give myself a little bit more wiggle room. It means that I've sat and recorded a lot of episodes quite closely. So I've recorded, this is the third episode within 24 to 48 hours. But that extra push that I've made in this short time frame is hopefully going to get me a little bit ahead so I can take some of that pressure off myself going forward. And if I can keep that rhythm going, then hopefully the stress on myself stays to a minimum and I build in the consistency that I want for this podcast. Other updates in terms of editing, I'm still kind of toying around with the brightness, so bear with me with that. I think I've got the brightness a bit better than it is, but the lighting still seems to be a little in and out, especially when I'm recording in the daytime. If the sun comes through the window, it seems to change the lighting or change the focus, and it may appear a little bit darker, or the background may be a bit darker and I'm a little bit lighter, but that's a small obstacle at the minute. Like I say, for most people, hopefully they're going to be listening to this. If some people are watching it, absolutely great. But I think it's such a small thing that it's not worth me stressing about right now. It's something I can definitely improve on in the future, and I am aware of it. But it's not something that's going to stop me producing content in that sense. As far as updates in terms of editing goes, I'm not sure that there's much more that I could tell you at the minute. I am going to, like I say, keep the footage fairly raw, so there's not many new features I could let you know of from CapCut. But I did kind of add in a few more on the guest episode. I added in, obviously, the name of Power Progression and the logo, which I was quite happy with how that came out. Although it was fairly simple to do, I think it was quite a nice touch to be able to give a visual along with talking about Power Progression. Again, it's, if anybody wanted to look up Dave's channel, it gives them the exact spelling, it shows his logo, it's a little shout out to him and a little nod to what he's doing beyond the whole kind of conversation that we was having about his journey. So yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it in terms of kind of update on the behind the scenes, if you want to put it like that. On the topic of your expectations of yourself, life, and other people, I'm gonna try to be a bit more systematic in how I go about this. So I'll go from one at a time. So I'll start with your expectations of yourself, because that's where it's all gonna start. As much as it is important to have high expectations of yourself, it's also important to manage those expectations. So to give some life examples from myself, like I've been doing the press ups, like I've been doing the podcast, you need to understand where you're at before you can start to progress in a consistent manner. If I would have tried to do an episode a week of this podcast, it wouldn't have been possible. It wouldn't have been sustainable. I'd have failed from the get-go, and I'd have lost all motivation and all enthusiasm to do it. So I had to manage how much I can do. Like, I would like to sit down and talk to people a lot more frequently, or talk to the camera more frequently, but at the moment, once a week is an honest and a reasonable commitment for myself that I know that I'm going to be able to maintain over an extended period of time. Truth be told, I'm still struggling with that, because I'm finding my feet in terms of the schedule keeping, managing what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to structure each episode, how I'm going to edit it. Do I have time to upload? Do I have time to edit everything? When can I get people on? Can I get people on? What am I going to talk to them about? So it's still very much all a maze of moving parts, but it's progressing. And it has to start somewhere, and it starts with understanding what's in your realm of capabilities. Like I said, I originally wanted to start this talking to a guest every episode, but that's not in my realm of possibilities right now. It's so hard to find the time to have somebody else to sit down with, have a conversation for possibly an hour or however long the episode runs for, however long the conversation runs for, and then still fit life all around that. This is still new to me, so it's still trying to fit it in life and find that pattern that's going to work for myself. So managing the personal expectations in that sense, to me, it's going to be integral to the success of this podcast. It's going to develop over time, so I'll have to move. If I get to the point where this becomes my sole focus in terms of career, then I'll have to increase the demand on myself. I'll have to move the threshold of what I expect of myself. If I'm going to expect this to be my full-time thing instead of a hobby at the moment, then I'm going to have to treat it as such. I'm going to have to put in the time that it takes to build it out, and I will have the time then to sit down with people more often, schedule people to come on, have these conversations where I have the time to do the research into the person or the topics that we're going to talk about, and really kind of explore different aspects. But that comes in time. At first, I need to understand where I'm at in my capabilities, in my surroundings, in my understanding of what I want to do and what this is. Do you know what I mean? Over time, this could develop into something drastically different than what it originally started with. I'm not to know that, but unless I start the journey, I'm never going to know. I needed to start this with a leap of faith of, well, it might be bumpy, it might be rough, but at least it's a starting point. First you stumble before you walk, that's fine, but you have to make that jump. Like I say, I knew I wanted to put a certain image to the podcast and have a certain image for the podcast, and I was fine in delaying the gratification in order to get that. I'm fairly happy with how it appears on camera and how I appear on camera. There are obviously certain things that I want to improve. There are certain things I'd like to add to the podcast space itself and overall develop the podcast space, the equipment, but it comes in time. First, you have to lay the foundations. That applies to more than just projects and everything else. Even the way you treat yourself and how you approach yourself is going to be important. Your own personal expectations of what you're going to do in a day to day. Like, if you're taking yourself for granted and you're trying to set goals and kind of put too much on your own plate, of course you're going to miss targets, but then that's only going to make you feel worse about yourself again. So you need to understand your capabilities. You need to take a second to step back, appreciate what you do, and be honest with yourself about what you do. If you have the time to work on X, Y, and Z, by all means go for it. But if you only have the time to work on one at a time, then that's your reality. That's where you have to start from and build out from there. But if you always hold out for being able to start in bulk, you'll never start at all, because the likelihood of getting to that point is a lot more unlikely. But you will get there if you're just willing to start and kind of build up slowly and manage your own expectations of what you're capable of. There's a saying, and I'm terrible at remembering names, so please forgive me, but most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10. And there is a lot to that. If you think in the immediate, there is a lot that you have to take care of, and it's hard to do everything at once. But if you're strategic in what you do and you play the long game and you understand that in the short term, you can only manage a certain amount of tasks or things at once. So if you play the slow game and build it up, and like I said before, I referred to things in my head as spinning plates. If you have one plate spinning and it's balanced, you can then distract yourself and get another plate spinning. But until one's spinning and it's at the point where it's balanced and it's going on its own, you have to tend to that one to get to that point of balance, to get to that point where it has the foundations in place in order to bear fruit. So really kind of take time to understand where you are and what you're capable of at the moment. It is going to be incredibly hard to truly be honest with yourself, because the easiest answer is to always project outward. It's always somebody else's fault. But no matter what, somebody else's actions are not within your control. Your actions are within your control. It's your life after all. It's your perspective of yourself. It's your expectations of yourself. So no matter of any other person's opinion, it is down to you to understand yourself better than anybody else. To understand what makes you tick, to understand why your mood fluctuates, or why your motivations fluctuate, or why you can just get up and go and constantly be on the go. Like, by understanding yourself more, you're only going to gain. You don't stand to lose anything by deepening your own understanding. When it comes to self-image and your expectations of yourself, it's going to constantly be a feedback loop. There's going to be times where you do something and you don't like the person that you was in that moment. But that moment's now past, so all you can do is examine that moment for what it is. Once it's past, that's it. Let go of it. It's only there now as a point of reflection. As much as you hold on to it, it's about what you take from that memory. If it's, I was a terrible person in that moment, then there's nothing to learn from that. But if that's a behavior that you understand that you don't want to do anymore, or it had a set trigger, there was a reason or cause or effect behind it, you can then understand yourself better and avoid doing that behavior in future. If you avoid doing that behavior in future, you then don't have that negative experience another time. So it all kind of builds out from these little dominoes where you start with self-adjustment. So moving on to expectations of others, much like with yourself, there's going to be fluctuations. There's going to be points where people exceed your expectations, and there's going to be points where people don't meet your expectations. But it's your expectations of them. Very much like you can't control them, they can't control you. And that back and forth, without having an understanding of it, you'll always kind of miscommunicate with somebody, because you'll never try to see from their side of things or understand where they're coming from in how they approach life. So when it comes to somebody else, your expectations for somebody else, you need to understand that if they're in your life, it is more than likely by choice. There are obviously some people that are in your life regardless of choice or not, but again, it's down to you to manage these interactions. The people that are in your life that you do hold dear or you do have expectations of, these people really and truly don't owe you anything. Much like you wake up in the morning, go about your life, they do the exact same thing. It's easy to lose sight that every person is going about their own reality, and realistically, nobody owes each other anything. So if someone sit down with you and take the time to spend time with you, or work on a project with you, or talk with you, and anything, invest in you in one way or another, appreciate that that is a conscious choice and that they don't have to do it. So if they do it on a regular basis, you then build that expectation. Whereas realistically, they never had to do it in the first place, so they don't have to continue doing it. So just appreciate people for who they are in the moment and in the time. It's going to be a forever changing thing. Don't try to hold people to a fixed image. Like, literally on a molecular level, over the course of your lifetime, every cell in your body will change God knows how many times. So you really are not the same person over time, but people's expectations don't seem to evolve the same way. We need to be a bit more fluid in our understanding of how, in my opinion anyway, of how people understand and perceive one another, because not everyone is going to understand everything the same way, and that's fine. Not everybody is going to want to be perceived the same way, and that's fine. But it's about having a common understanding. I think beyond anything else, everybody wants to be understood and appreciated. If we're all talking over each other and not giving each other a word in, we're never going to achieve that moment where we have common understanding and have a society that happiness is the default. I mean, in life, I do believe there's always going to be a certain amount of misery. It's not going to ever be a flat scale. If you completely obliterated one, the other one would disappear as well. So you're always going to have good and bad in life. But it's about understanding that ebb and flow. When it's somebody close to you, it can be hard to it can be easy to lose sight of the fact that they have their own things going on and they have their own life to care about, or their own children to care about, or their own projects. And it's obviously everybody's living life from their own perspective, it's their own life, it's their own existence. So everything that you have is an outward interaction. Well, that is the same for everybody. But to me, it's easy for people to lose sight of that and have that disconnect where we essentially don't treat each other as humans anymore, or equals, or it's easy to put yourself first because everybody's in that hustle and bustle of trying to survive for the most part. And if everybody just kind of took that pressure off themselves to meet all of the expectations that they are putting on themselves and other people are putting on them that they cannot meet. Again, it's not to say give up, but it's to say manage them. If you're overstressed at work and your workload is just too much, and by all means you are doing everything you can, then there is no shame in going to your boss and saying, it's too much, I need a little bit of help in this situation. At least by managing your workload and being honest with yourself and being honest with your boss, you've now managed that situation and been able to make life better for yourself, get the project or get the work done. And all it took was a little bit of honesty with yourself to say that I need help in this instance to kind of get this over the push. There's going to be loads of instances in life where swallowing your pride in that sense is going to emit far more growth than you can anticipate. There's so much to be learned in admitting that you don't know something, that there's understanding that is gained from it, because there are so many people that are still learning themselves. Everybody's still learning something in one respect or another. And it's very rare that that gets acknowledged. So when somebody does acknowledge the fact that they're out there doing their thing and they need a bit of help or whatever, for the most part, it resonates with people. But it's about managing what that expectation is of when it's going to resonate. So even if it does resonate, even if what you do or the work that you do, even if the task gets complete that time and then a few weeks down the line, your boss puts you in the same situation again and you're back to him and you're like, look, you've done it again. I've got too much on, I need help. It's a learning curve towards the point where eventually they will learn that either you need somebody when the workload increases to be on hand to help you, or they need to regulate their workload better. But by never shining a light on the problem, it will never improve. So by going through that awkwardness and managing the kind of expectations of yourself and the other side, you can manage the problem better in the future. It might not be the first, second, or third time that it changes, but if you keep managing that and you keep mediating your workload in that sense, no matter what avenue this is on, it will apply. That kind of mediation of how much you can do and how much you're capable of doing and how much you need to outsource, that will propel you a lot further than over expecting, getting under what you wanted, and then being disappointed with the end result. So having that bit of foresight to understand each side and each person's kind of perspective and managing the expectations of them, I like to use the example of if somebody's working on something that you own, say you take your car to the garage or you take your car to the car wash. To me, I'm never satisfied with the way that they do it because they're not going to be sitting in that car driving around and they're not overly bothered. For them, it's a job, they get the job done and there you go. By all means, I could probably pay more to get more attention and everything else, but regardless, there's going to be a line where, to me, with my stuff, I'm going to care more about looking after it than somebody else's. So I apply that across the board. Again, I'm flexible where it needs to be, but for the most part, nobody's going to look at this podcast and foresee what I see for it. And I may be wrong with that, but it's only me that's going to bring it out and lead it anywhere. If I was to outsource all of the editing straight away and all of the kind of the hard stuff, I would miss the kind of learning curve and all of the growth that there is behind the scenes of understanding how this is all done. So it's all a kind of intertwining web of understanding where you're at, understanding where somebody else is at, and kind of having that back and forth of, again, it's going to be inevitable that you expect things of people, but you also need to understand that those expectations, they're not an obligation by that other person. If they say they're going to do something, yeah, they should uphold their word, and it's nice if they do, but at the same time, they've got their own things going on as well. And if you end up in the situation where they do keep letting you down, well, then you need to reduce your expectations. Sometimes that means the painful thing of cutting off that person or stopping that friendship or quitting that job. But again, the alternative is surviving something where you're unhappy or never flourish in your endeavors or whatever it is. The alternative is far worse than the short-lived discomfort of pushing through the hard part of moderating and managing your own expectations for both parties. So let's move on to the last part of this expectation triangle, which is life. And quite frankly, I don't know where to begin with this. At the moment in 2023, the world seems like it's kind of going crazy. I'm not sure how much I want to talk about current affairs because I try not to stay too much in the loop. For the most part, a lot of media and a lot of what is put out there seems to be quite negative. I like to keep my space quite positive. So I pick and choose what I'm exposed to in terms of content. That then creates its own bias, and obviously I will then think a certain way because of what I'm exposed to, and I acknowledge that. So I don't want to put out too many of my bias in terms of current affairs and how things are going, but I do need to acknowledge them. It is something that is going on. It's something that everybody's going through, and yeah, it can't be ignored in that sense. So let's see how I can navigate these waters. For the most part, what's going on in the world is not going to be in your control. But does that mean you bury your head in the sand? To me, it doesn't. I like to ask people this question of, if you could bury your head in the sand, go to a tropical island, live out a blissful life, but at any day the whole world could collapse and everything be ruined, or stay in the chaotic world and push, or at least try to make a difference and try to make things better, which would you choose? And for the most part, people choose to stay and try to make the difference. Because if you was to go to the island, you'd forever be looking over your shoulder. You'd have that uncertainty of what if. And to me, that what if is a nightmare. That question of what would happen or what could happen, that would just roll around in my head and I would overthink. So managing the expectations of the world doesn't owe you anything. There's so many people walking through life thinking that everybody else owes them something for being here and life owes them something, and there should be a reward for just them being here. But unless you're bringing value or putting value out into the world, why should you get value back? There's always an exchange. Regardless of where you're coming from, you're going to be exchanging something. So if you're talking about kind of London life, most people exchange their time for money. If you're talking about a bit more, say, freedom in your life, you're more than likely selling a product or service for money. And that scale will go up and down. That's to operate in our life or in our society. There's still places on this earth where people operate completely differently. And it's so easy to slip into the understanding or the mindset that this is the be all and end all. The world is a big place. If you're willing and you're brave enough to go out there and explore, there's so many different ways that you could live life and so many different experiences that you could have that it would more than likely blow your expectations out of the water. But because we're constantly in this repetitive exposure of the same thing, you go to the same job day in, day out, you more than likely go on the same holiday every couple of years, or you go on holiday at the same time every couple of months or every year. Everything is either short-lived or repetitive. There's no freedom or excitement in that sense. And to me, that's what a lot of people are searching for, that kind of, that life of happiness, that life of, I get to pursue what I want to pursue and I feel fulfilled doing it. And I think everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves to be or feel complete. But everyone's journey to that point is different. For some people, it might take traveling the world to gain that understanding and for them to experience that and for them to achieve their happiness. For somebody else, it could be sitting solo in a cave, meditating in silence for decades. There's nothing to say that one person's happiness has to fit somebody else's, but understanding that the world is full of people just like yourself trying to explore, trying to be happy, trying to achieve their life ambitions. And there's going to be some people that never achieve those life ambitions and they're projecting onto the world their miseries. But then there's still something to be learned in that's what happens when you don't pursue your dreams or you don't take the leap of faith. It's not to say that there's nothing to be learned in failure. It's just having the foresight and the understanding to be able to step back and look at the bigger picture rather than identifying too much with in terms of ego and too much in terms of self. So like once I've done these podcast episodes, once the episode's recorded, I've completely disconnected. That's no longer me. I'm me in the moment. That's everyone. Everyone's living in the moment. No matter what they do, no matter what walk of life they're in, they're constantly going through their own experiences. For the most part, we are more the same than we are different. And it's so easy to forget that because for so many instances in life, it's the differences that people focus on. In my experience, most people are looking for, I mean, it's a bit of a contradiction, but one, a sense of identity, but two, a sense of community, because nobody quite knows who they are, but everybody wants to belong somewhere. So you get these communities building up where you've basically got lost people trying to find one another. And sometimes these can be effective and sometimes these can be horrific. That it all depends on the intention of the people behind it. So once you start on the intention of improving life and you start down that kind of rabbit hole, you seem to draw people along that same kind of avenue, or you at least kind of notice them more. It's like, I like to say to people, like, if you wake up one day and step on a plug, you can even say, right, today is going to be a terrible day, it's ruined from the get-go. Or you can say, right, well, that's the bad thing for today out of the way. The rest of the day's got to be uphill from here. And depending on what mindset you go in with, you'll focus on different things. And your day will change because of it. This happens all throughout the world for every single person. And you might meet somebody one day and have a terrible experience with them. You meet them the next day and they're great to talk to and you like the person. It's all situational and it's all fluctuating, but you need to develop that understanding of building the image over time rather than taking one image and defining everything from that. That's really kind of, in terms of the seed for this episode, I would say understand you're only human, or understand that you're a work in progress would probably be a better way of saying it. You may not be human, never know. Hi, E.T. But yeah, like, manage your kind of expectations on yourself and kind of understand that it's going to forever fluctuate. So if you want to build something up to go into the gym regularly and you want to go 5 days a week, well, you're not necessarily going to start by just going to the gym 5 days a week. It's going to start by going to the gym 1 day a week, and you build up from there. So don't underestimate the ability for the small steps to kind of get you where you want to be. Give yourself the chance to step back and appreciate what you're doing and what you've got going on, and understand what you are actually capable of, and then manage that and build from there. It's great to dream and have big plans, but they all start somewhere. They all start somewhere small. So don't kind of overlook those small steps. And I'm going to leave it there for that episode. All the best. I'll catch you on the next one.